what if doing well with money has less to do with how smart you are and everything to do with how you behave? That's the provocative question we're diving into today, and it's really the core of our deep dive. Welcome to the deep dive. We're peeling back the layers on Morgan Housel's incredible book, The Psychology of Money. Our mission today is to cut through the noise, and illuminate that often overlooked behavioral side of finance. This isn't just about what to do with your money. It's about understanding why we make the decisions we do, and crucially, how to maybe make better ones. I know I certainly had a few aha moments digging into this, and I think you will too. Hopefully it feels personally tailored, So let's jump right in. There's this central paradox in the book. The idea that genius can lead to financial disaster, while humble consistency can create immense wealth. Feels counterintuitive, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. And what I find striking is how unique this is to finance. Think about it. In most fields, brilliance, it correlates pretty directly with success. You wouldn't expect a brilliant surgeon to suddenly, lose their touch because they're in a bad mood.
Right. Or an architect to forget basic design.
Exactly. Yet in investing, intellectual genius, something we value so highly elsewhere, it doesn't guarantee success. In fact, sometimes it can even be, a liability.
That's a powerful point.
Right.
And it brings to mind a truly shocking story Housel shares about a technology executive. This guy was a certified genius, patented a key Wi-Fi component in his 20s. Should have been set for life.
You'd think so.
But he had this, his relationship with money was just completely off. A bizarre mix of insecurity and almost childish recklessness. He'd carry huge stacks of hundreds, brag loudly, and get this. One day, he hands a valet thousands of dollars to go buy $1,000 gold coins.
Gold coins?
Yeah, and then he throws them into the Pacific Ocean, skipping them like rocks, just for fun.
Wow, that's something.
And days later, he breaks a lamp worth maybe $500, pays the manager $5,000 just to, make him go away.
So how long did that last?
Not long, surprisingly. He went broke.
It's a vivid illustration, isn't it? Really underlines that a genius who loses control of their emotions, who lets ego run the show, they can be a financial disaster. Raw intelligence just isn't enough.
And the reverse is equally, maybe even more, incredible. Consider Ronald Read, his Wikipedia entry. American philanthropist, investor, janitor, and gas station attendant.
We like the mix.
Born in rural Vermont, first in his family to finish high school, hitchhiked to get there. Life was super low-key, fixed cars for 25 years, swept floors at JCPenney for 17, bought a $12,000 house, widowed young, never remarried. Main hobby, chopping wood.
Seems like a very simple life, and yet...
And yet, when he died in 2014, age 92, international headlines. Think about this. Nearly 3 million Americans died that year. Fewer than 4,000 had a net worth over $8 million. Ronald Read was one of them.
Incredible, $8 million. From a janitor.
Yep. Left $2 million to his stepkids, over $6 million to the local hospital and library, no lottery win, no inheritance.
How?
He just saved what little he could, invested patiently in blue-chip stocks, big, stable companies. And he waited for decades. That's basically it.
Just consistency and time.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Now, contrast that with Richard Fuscone, Harvard-educated, Merrill Lynch exec, retired in his 40s. He was on those 40 under 40 lists for business savvy.
Right, the opposite end of the spectrum, education-wise.
But his Palm Beach house, foreclosed. His Greenwich mansion, the one with the see-through covering on the home's indoor swimming pool, sold in foreclosure for 75% less than it was worth. Same year Ronald Read died a multimillionaire.
Wow. That contrast really crystallizes it, doesn't it? In finance, unlike maybe heart surgery or skyscraper design, someone with zero formal training can just crush someone with the best education, purely based on behavior.
Patience versus greed.
Read had patience, discipline. Fuscone, it seems, was driven by greed, maybe too much leverage. That behavioral difference just wiped out any education gap. It shows financial success isn't just what you know, it's profoundly about how you act.
This leads perfectly into another core idea from the book. No one's crazy. People do some truly weird things with money. But from their perspective, maybe it makes perfect sense. Do you find that hard for people to get their heads around?
It's one of the biggest mental hurdles, I think. We naturally project our own worldview, our own experiences, but if you really stop and think, people from different generations, different income levels, different countries, different job markets, they learn vastly different lessons about how money works.
So what seems irrational to me?
Might be perfectly logical based on someone else's life experience.
Yeah.
What seems crazy to you is just a result of their unique financial reality.
So you could have two equally smart people look at the same exact economic data.
And come to wildly different conclusions about recessions or investing or risk.
Yeah.
It's not about raw intelligence.
It's about those deeply personal money stories we all have.
Exactly.
Let's use a powerful example the book uses. Lottery tickets. Americans spend more on lottery tickets than on movies, video games, music, sports, and books combined.
It's a staggering amount. And who buys the most? It's mostly low-income households.
Right. The data shows the lowest income folks spend, on average, something like $412 a year on tickets, 4 times more than higher income groups.
Now, put that next to the stat that, 40% of Americans can't easily come up with $400 for an emergency?
On the surface, it looks completely irrational, right?
Yeah.
Especially if you're reading finance books. Why spend on the lottery if you don't have emergency savings?
But if you try to see it from their perspective,
It's maybe not irrational at all. For someone living paycheck to paycheck, limited prospects, can't afford the stuff others take for granted, buying that ticket might be the only time they feel like they have a shot, a tangible dream of a different life.
they're paying for a dream, as some put it.
Yeah. It's a striking reminder that financial decisions aren't made on spreadsheets usually. They're made at the dinner table, Personal history, ego, pride, weird incentives. It all gets mixed into a story that makes sense to them.
It really makes you think about your own financial story, doesn't it?
Definitely.
And it highlights how our own experiences, which are just a tiny sliver of history, maybe make up like 80% of how we think the world actually works.
And this brings us to another key point. How incredibly new modern finance really is. So many tools we rely on are like babies in historical terms.
Yeah.
The 401k, that didn't even exist until 1978.
Barely middle-aged.
The Roth IRA, 1998. It's barely old enough to drink.
Ha! True.
And widespread consumer debt, mortgages, credit cards as we know them, mostly a post-World War II phenomenon.
So the analogy Houses uses is great. If dogs, domesticated 10,000 years ago, still have some wild instincts, how can we expect ourselves to be perfectly adapted to a financial system that's maybe 20 to 50 years old in its current form?
Good point. It means we're all kind of newbies navigating this stuff.
We're all learning. We're prone to making what look like poor decisions because, honestly, we're all sort of winging it. There's no deep evolutionary programming for Roth conversions.
That's crucial. We need some humility about our financial choices, knowing we're all still figuring this out. Okay, building on that, let's talk about luck and risk. They're intertwined, aren't they?
Totally. Siblings, as Housel calls them. The reality that outcomes aren't just about individual effort.
You can't really believe in one without respecting the other.
Yeah, exactly.
Think about Bill Gates. Incredible success, obviously immense talent. But there was huge luck involved, too. He went to Lakeside, one of the only high schools in the world with a computer, in 1968.
Which was amazing back then. Most universities didn't have that.
And how did they get it? The Mother's Club. A $3,000 rummage sale funded the lease.
Incredible.
So out of over 300 million high school-age kids globally then, only about 300 went to Lakeside.
1 in a million chance.
And Bill Gates was one of them.
Yeah.
That access was an unbelievable head start.
Unparalleled. But that's not the whole story, is it? There's the flip side.
No, it's not. Contrast Bill's 1 in a million luck with Kent Evans. Gates' close friend. Equally smart, equally ambitious. They planned to conquer the world together.
He could have been a Microsoft co-founder.
Could have been. But Kent died tragically in a mountaineering accident before they even graduated high school.
Oh, wow.
The odds of being killed mountaineering in high school? Roughly 1 in a million.
So one gets the amazing luck, the other gets the devastating risk. Same odds, opposite outcomes.
Exactly. 2 kids, similar drive, similar talent. One hits the luck jackpot, one hits the risk tragedy.
It's just striking how these external forces shape things, regardless of effort. And it means when we look at financial success, ours or others, it's never quite as good or as bad as it seems on the surface.
Because luck is hard to see, hard to quantify, and maybe it feels impolite to point it out.
Right, so we often just ignore it, but it's always there.
And this leads to a major pitfall. The danger of trying to copy someone else's success, especially extreme success.
Because you might be copying their luck, not their skill.
Think of Cornelius Vanderbilt. Building his railroad empire, his advisor told him basically every move he made was illegal.
Ha! And Vanderbilt's response.
My God, John, you don't suppose you can run a railroad in accordance with the statutes of the state of New York, do you?
So blatant law-breaking.
Which, in hindsight, gets framed as sage wisdom because he succeeded. But you wouldn't advise crime as a business strategy, right?
Absolutely not. His story could have gone very differently with a different judge or political climate. Same for Rockefeller.
Even Benjamin Graham, the father of value investing. His biggest win, the one that made his fortune, was a massive bet on Geico stock.
Which broke all his own rules about diversification.
He admitted it was basically a lucky break.
So the line between bold and reckless.
Housel says it's a millimeter thick and only visible with hindsight.
That's so true.
Which is why focusing on broad patterns of success and failure is way more useful than trying to emulate extreme outliers. Yeah, the more extreme the story, the more likely luck or massive risk was involved, making it less useful for, us normal folks.
So when things go really well for you, maybe remember it's not all skill. You're not invincible.
And if luck got you there, risk, its sibling, can easily take it away. Humility is key.
Definitely.
Okay, let's shift gears slightly. Let's talk about the pursuit of enough. This concept really hit home for me. There's this great anecdote from John Bogle. Kurt Vonnegut and Joseph Heller are at a billionaire's party.
Okay.
Vonnegut points out that their host, a hedge fund guy, made more money in one day than Heller had ever made from Catch-22.
Wow. And Heller's response?
Heller says, yes, but I have something he will never have.
What?
Enough.
Ooh, that's powerful. So simple, but
Yeah,
wow.
It really is.
Yeah.
It speaks volumes, especially today with constant comparison.
And the real danger is not knowing when to stop, right? That insatiable appetite for more.
We see it in those cautionary tales.
Mm-hmm.
Rajat Gupta, orphan teenager, becomes CEO of McKinsey by his mid-40s, worth $100 million.
Could have done anything. Had it made.
But he desperately wanted to be a billionaire.
So he?
Risked it all. Got inside info about Warren Buffett investing in Goldman Sachs. Called a hedge fund manager 16 seconds later. Insider trading.
And ended up
In prison. Along with Bernie Madoff. Careers, reputations, everything. Ruined.
because they didn't know what enough was.
Exactly. As Buffett said, they risked what they did have and did need for what they didn't have and didn't need. And that's foolish.
So for you, the listener, enough isn't about settling for too little. It's realizing that chasing more endlessly often leads to regret or worse.
The hardest financial skill is getting the goalpost to stop moving.
Absolutely. And it's so hard because of that endless treadmill of social comparison. Think about a rookie baseball player making $500,000 a year. Sounds amazing, right?
Totally.
But maybe he's on the same team as Mike Trout with his $430 million contract. Suddenly, $500K feels not so rich.
And Mike Trout making $36 million a year, he might compare himself to top hedge fund managers pulling in hundreds of millions or billions.
The ceiling just keeps going up. You can never really win that comparison game.
It's unwinnable.
A friend mentioned asking a Vegas dealer what games they played. The dealer said, dead serious. The only way to win in a Las Vegas casino is to exit as soon as you enter.
Huh. That's good.
And it applies perfectly to the game of keeping up with other people's wealth. Enough means opting out of that game. Realizing more chasing leads to regret.
And this brings us to what I think is maybe the real secret of wealth, or at least a huge part of it, compounding.
Ah, yes, the eighth wonder of the world, supposedly.
It's so counterintuitive, though. Its power is easy to miss. Housel used the analogy of ice ages.
Right, not some sudden catastrophe, but tiny changes over long periods.
Milankovitch cycles. Slight wobbles in Earth's orbit mean some parts get a tiny bit less sun.
So little snow doesn't melt one summer, reflects more sunlight, cools things slightly, more snow stays next year.
And you compound that over millennia, and bam, miles of ice covering the planet.
It is not necessarily the amount of snow that causes ice sheets, one scientist said, but the fact that snow, however little, lasts.
And that's exactly like money. Warren Buffett, $84.5 billion fortune. Is he just the best investor ever?
She's certainly good, very good, but is that the whole story?
No. The secret is he's been a good investor since he was 10 years old.
That long, wow.
Get this, of his $84.5 billion, $84.2 billion came after his 50th birthday.
That's insane. The vast majority came late.
If he'd started at 30 like a normal person and retired at 60, his wealth would be 99.9% less.
So his skill is investing, but his secret is time. Letting compounding run wild.
Exactly. Contrast him with Jim Simons from Renaissance Technology.
Yeah. His returns are legendary, like 66% annually.
Way higher than Buffett's 22%. Yet Simons' net worth is only $21 billion, 75% less than Buffett's. Why?
He started later, right? Didn't hit his stride until he was 50.
Exactly. Less than half the time for compounding to work its magic. If Simons had Buffett's time horizon, the numbers would be unimaginable.
It really highlights how easily we overlook the duration factor in compounding. We focus on the annual return number.
So what does this mean for you listening? Good investing isn't necessarily about hitting home runs, getting the absolute highest returns.
Because those are often flukes, hard to repeat.
It's about getting pretty good returns that you can stick with for the longest period of time.
Consistency and endurance. That's when compounding really takes off.
Okay, this leads to a really interesting distinction. Getting wealthy versus staying wealthy.
Ah, yes. Two different skills.
We talk a lot about getting wealthy, but maybe not enough about staying wealthy. The book argues there's only one way to stay wealthy. Some mix of frugality and paranoia.
Yeah, it's often the untold story. Look at Jesse Livermore. Greatest stock trader of his day, maybe ever.
Made a fortune shorting the 1929 crash, right? The equivalent of $3 billion in a single day.
Told his family, we are fabulously rich and can do whatever we like. Total confidence.
But what happened next?
Just 4 years later, he made bigger and bigger bets, got overconfident, went way over his head.
Lost everything.
Lost everything, and tragically committed suicide. He was brilliant at getting wealthy, but terrible at staying wealthy.
And that pattern holds true, doesn't it? At all income levels. Getting money is one skill, keeping it is another.
If I had to pick one word for money success, Housel suggests survival.
Survival. That makes sense.
Michael Moritz at Sequoia Capital, the venture capital firm, decades of success. His reason, he says it's a fear of going out of business, paranoia, basically. We assume tomorrow won't be like yesterday. We can't be complacent.
That focus ensures survival. And compounding needs survival, needs years and years to work.
You have to survive all the bumps, the downturns, the unpredictable stuff.
Which raises a really important question for you, the listener. How crucial is it for you to be financially unbreakable? Even if that means maybe missing out on some potential upsides, some higher returns.
Nobody likes holding cash during a bull market, right? You feel like you're missing out.
Totally. Feels too conservative?
But what if that cash stops you from having to sell your stocks when the market tanks, when prices are crushed?
Then the return on that cash isn't just the tiny interest rate.
Exactly. It's the massive loss you avoided. Preventing one desperate, panicked sale can do more for your lifetime wealth than picking dozens of winners.
So survival, staying in the game, is paramount.
Compounding just needs good returns, sustained without interruption, especially through the chaos.
This connects directly to Benjamin Graham's idea of room for error, margin of safety.
Graham famously said the purpose of margin of safety is to render the forecast unnecessary.
I love that. It's about admitting you don't know the future.
Exactly. Uncertainty, randomness, chance. They're always there. Think about blackjack card counters.
Even if they have a slight edge, say 2%.
They still need a big enough bankroll to handle the swings of bad luck. You can't bet everything on one hand, even if you think you're right.
You have to plan on your plan not going according to plan.
Right.
There's a wild historical anecdote Housel uses to drive this home. World War II, German tanks near Stalingrad.
Okay.
They were desperately needed at the front, but when they went to deploy them, almost none worked.
Why? Mechanical failure.
Field mice. They nested inside the tanks and chewed through the wiring insulation.
No way. Mice took out the panzers.
Yep. The most advanced tech defeated by mice. It shows how unexpected things, stuff too crazy to even imagine, can wreck the best laid plans.
That's a perfect example of, as Housel puts it, the messy realities of life. And the biggest single point of failure for most people financially. Probably relying solely on a paycheck with no savings buffer.
No gap
Life's
between income and
inevitable
expenses.
ability to surprise the
No
hell
room
out
for
of you
error
at the
when
worst
life
possible
inevitably
moment.
throws
Predicting
a curveball.
exactly what you'll need savings
just for
for
savings'
assumes a
sake,
predictable
without a
world.
specific goal.
Which we
That's not
definitely
being
don't
aimless.
live in.
No,
Savings
it's a
without a
hedge.
goal
It's
gives you
building that
options,
buffer against the
flexibility,
unpredictable.
the ability to wait,
Life's
the chance to
inevitable
pounce.
ability to surprise
It's
the
an
hell out of you at the
unseen,
worst
maybe
possible moment.
incalculable
Predicting
return.
exactly what
That's
you'll
a
need
really
savings
powerful
for
way to think
assumes a
about saving.
predictable world. Okay,
Which we
another
definitely
big
don't
idea.
live in.
Reasonable
Savings without a goal
is
gives
greater
you
than
options,
rational.
flexibility,
This is
the
a good
ability to
one.
wait,
You're not a
the chance
spreadsheet,
to pounce.
right? You're a person.
It's an unseen,
Emotional,
maybe incalculable
complex.
return.
Wonderfully messy.
That's a really
so something
powerful
could be
way to think
technically
about saving.
true on paper,
Okay, another big
financially
idea.
rational, but just
Reasonable is greater than
contextually
rational.
nonsense for a real human
This
being.
is a good
Absolutely.
You're not a
The example of
spreadsheet,
Harry
right? You're a
Markowitz
person.
is perfect.
Right.
Nobel
Emotional,
Prize winner, father of
complex.
modern portfolio
Wonderfully
theory.
messy.
You'd
So
expect
something
his
can
own
be
portfolio
technically
to be
true on
hyper-optimized,
paper,
rationally
financially
Right.
rational,
But for
just
his own retirement savings, he
contextually
chose a simple
nonsense for a real
50-50
human
split
being.
between
Absolutely.
stocks and
The
bonds.
example
What,
of
was
Harry
that
Markowitz
mathematically
is
optimal?
perfect.
Right. No.
Nobel Prize
he did
winner,
it, in his
father
words,
of modern
to minimize
portfolio
future
theory.
regret.
You'd expect his own
He pictured
portfolio
how
to be
awful he'd feel if the
hyper-optimized,
market
rational,
soared and he
perfect.
missed it
Right.
or crashed.
But for his own
and he was
retirement
all in.
savings,
So
he chose
he
a
chose the
simple
emotionally
50-50 split
comfortable
between
path, the
stocks and
reasonable one
bonds.
for him,
What,
not
was
the
that
purely
mathematically
rational
optimal?
one on paper.
No.
Exactly.
He did
It
it in
balances
his words
logic
to
and
minimize
emotion.
future
It's
regret.
so
He
insightful. It
pictured how
highlights
awful
that
he'd
social
feel
and
if the
emotional
market
side of
soared and he
investing
missed
we
it or
often
crashed
ignore.
and he was
What
all
looks
in.
rational
So
can
he
actually be a
chose the emotionally
liability if
comfortable
it makes
path,
you
the
bail
reasonable
on your
one for him, not the
strategy
purely
when things get
rational one on
scary.
paper. which
Exactly.
makes me
It
think.
balances logic and emotion.
Maybe there's real value
It's
in
so
investing in
insightful.
things
It
you
highlights its
actually
social and
like,
emotional side of
believe in, or are
investing we
passionate
often
about.
For
ignore.
sure. That
What looks
connection, that
rational can
love,
actually be a
can give you the
liability
sticking
if it
power,
makes
the
you bail
endurance
on
you
your
need to ride
strategy
out the
when
tough
things get
times.
scary.
Even Jack
Which
Bogle,
makes me
Mr.
think.
Low-Cost Index Fund himself.
Maybe there's
Yeah.
real value in
He
investing
apparently
in things you
invested some
actually
money in his
like,
son's
believe in, or are
active high-fee
passionate about.
hedge
For
fund.
sure. That
Really.
connection, that
That
love
seems
can give you the
inconsistent.
sticking
He
power,
told
the
Wall Street Journal,
endurance you
basically,
need to ride out
we
the
do
tough
some things for
times.
family
Even Jack
reasons.
Bogle,
If
Mr.
it's not
Low-Cost Index
consistent,
Fund
well,
himself.
life isn't
Yeah.
always
He
consistent.
apparently invested some
That's
money
right.
in
A
his
perfect
son's
example of
active high-fee
reasonable
hedge
over
fund.
purely
Really.
rational
That
life
seems
happens.
Okay,
inconsistent.
let's talk about history.
He told the Wall Street
How it
Journal
can be a
basically,
misleading guide.
we do some
And
things
also,
for family reasons.
how much you're going to
If it's not
change over
consistent,
time.
well, life
Two
isn't
really
always
important
consistent.
concepts.
Stanford
That's
professor
great.
Scott
A perfect
Sagan
example
said,
of
things that have never
reasonable
happened
over
before
purely
happen all the time.
rational life
Which is
happens.
funny because
Okay, let's
history
talk
is
about history.
mostly the
How
study
can
of
be a misleading
surprising,
guide,
unprecedented
and
events.
also
Yet
how much
investors
you're
and
going to change
economists
over time.
often treat
Two
past
really important
data
concepts.
like it's an
Stanford
infallible
professor
map of the
Scott
future.
Sagan said,
There's the
things that
irony.
have never happened before
Investing
happen
isn't
all
physics.
the time.
As
Which is
Richard
funny
Feynman
because
said,
history is
imagine
mostly
how much
the
harder
study of
physics would
surprising,
be if
unprecedented
electrons had
events.
feelings.
Yet investors and
investors definitely
economists
have feelings,
often
lots
treat
of them.
past
Which makes
data
predicting
like
their
it's an
behavior
infallible
based
map of
only
the
on
future.
past
There's
patterns
the irony.
really tricky.
Investing isn't
Relying
physics.
too heavily
As
on
Richard
history
Feynman
means
said,
you miss the
imagine
big,
how much harder
unexpected
physics
events
would
that really
be
move
if
the needle.
electrons had
Great
feelings.
Depression,
And
WII,
investors definitely have
9/11.
feelings, lots of them.
Which makes
They were
predicting their
unprecedented.
behavior
And history
based
can also
only on
mislead
past
because
patterns
the
really
structure of the
tricky.
world changes.
Relying
Things
too
relevant
heavily on
today
history
didn't
means
exist 50
you
years
miss
ago.
the big
401ks,
unexpected events
Roth
that really move
IRAs.
the
Venture
needle.
capitalism
Great
major
Depression,
force is pretty new.
WWII,
How companies
9/11.
get funded has changed dramatically.
They were
So
unprecedented.
using Ben
And
Graham's
history can
formulas
also
from the
mislead
1930s
because
directly
the
today,
structure of the world changes.
maybe it
Things
doesn't work so
relevant
well.
today
game
didn't
has
exist
changed.
50 years ago.
Information is everywhere,
401ks,
competition
Roth
is
IRAs.
fiercer.
Venture
The
capitalism
further back
major
you
force
look,
is
the less
pretty
relevant
new.
the
How
world you're
companies
studying
get
might
funded
be.
has changed
Okay, connected to that is
So using Ben
the end of
Graham's
history
formulas
illusion.
from the 1930s directly today.
I had this friend growing up.
Maybe it doesn't work
His
so well.
dream was
The game
always to
has
be a
changed.
doctor. Pushed
Information is
incredibly
everywhere,
hard, finally
competition
made
is
it.
fiercer.
Decade
The
older
further
than his
back you
classmates.
look, the less relevant the world you're
Talked to
studying
him
might
years
be.
later.
Okay,
He
connected
said it
to
was
that
an
is
awful career.
the end of history
Totally
illusion.
burned out by the stress, the
I had this
hours.
friend
Ouch.
growing up. His
It's a
dream was
surprisingly
always to be a
common
doctor.
story, though.
Pushed
And it ties
incredibly
into
hard, finally
psychological
made
finding.
it. Decade
Yeah.
older than his
People
classmates.
are terrible forecasters of their
Talked to
future
him
selves.
years later.
We know how much
He
we've
said it was
changed
an
in the
awful
past,
career.
but we consistently
burned out by the
underestimate
stress,
how
the
much
hours.
our personalities, our desires,
It's a
our
surprisingly
goals
common
will change in
story,
the
though.
future.
And it
That's
ties
the
into
end
this
of history
psychological
illusion.
finding.
Thinking who
Yeah.
you are now.
People are
is
terrible
basically the finished
forecasters of their
product.
future
Right.
selves.
So
we know how much we've changed in
how
the
on
past,
earth do you
but we
make long-term
consistently
financial
underestimate
plans
how
when your
much
future
our
self might want
personalities, our
something
desires, our
completely
goals
different?
will
That's
change
the
in
million-dollar
future.
question
That's
for
the end of
financial
history
planning, isn't it?
illusion. Thinking who
It's
you
a
are
real
now
puzzle.
The
is
book's
basically the
suggestion.
finished product.
Right.
Avoid the extreme
So,
ends of financial planning.
How on earth do you make
Don't
long-term
assume you'll be
financial
happy
plans
living on almost
when your
nothing
future
forever.
self might want
And
something
don't commit to working
completely
insane
different?
hours
That's the
forever,
million-dollar
chasing
question for
maximum
financial
income.
planning, isn't it?
Because your future
a
self
real
might
puzzle.
regret
The book's
either extreme.
suggestion.
Exactly.
Avoid the
Aim
extreme
for
ends
balance.
of financial planning.
Balance in saving, saving, free
Don't
time,
assume you'll be happy
work
living on almost
that
nothing
promotes
forever.
endurance,
And
makes
don't
it more
commit to
likely
working
you'll stick
insane
with
hours
something.
forever
And be willing
chasing
to ditch
maximum income.
sunk
Because your
costs.
future self might regret
Remember Daniel
either extreme.
Kahneman's editor
Exactly.
facing a discarded
Aim for
draft?
balance.
I have
balance
no
in
sunk
saving,
costs.
free
Love that.
time, work.
Be ruthless about
that promotes
abandoning goals that no
endurance,
longer fit
makes
the
it more
person you've
likely
become.
you'll stick
It's
with
freeing.
something.
Okay,
And be
let's talk
willing
about
to
the hidden
ditch
price of success. Sunk costs.
Everything
Yes.
costs something, right?
Remember
But the
Daniel
price
Kahneman's
often
editor
isn't
facing a
obvious
discarded
until you're
draft?
paying it.
I have
Jeff
no
Immelt,
sunk costs.
former
Love
GE
that.
CEO,
Be
apparently
ruthless
told his
about abandoning
successor,
goals that no
every
longer
job
fit the
looks
person
easy
you've
when
become.
you're
It's
not the one
freeing.
doing it.
Okay, let's talk
That
about the
applies
hidden price of
perfectly to
success.
investing.
You see
Everything
the S&P
costs
500
something,
went up
right?
119-fold over 50
often
years.
isn't
Looks
obvious
easy.
until you're
Just
paying
sit back
it.
and let it
Jeff
compound.
Immelt, former
Well, what's the
GE
price you
CEO,
paid for that
apparently
return?
told his successor,
It's the
every job
volatility,
looks
the
easy
fear,
when
the
you're
doubt,
not the one
uncertainty,
doing it. the
That
regret
applies
along the way.
perfectly to investing.
Stuff that's
You
easy
see the
to
S&P
ignore
500
when
went
looking
up
at a historical
119-fold
chart,
over
but
50
really hard
years.
to live
Looks
through in
easy.
real time.
Just sit back
A
and
lot
let
of
it
investors
compound.
try to dodge
But
that price
what's the
rate.
price you paid
Like
for that
a
return?
car thief trying to get the car without
It's the
paying.
volatility,
They try
the
market
fear,
timing.
the doubt, the uncertainty,
Sell before the dip,
regret
buy
along
back
the way.
before the boom.
Stuff that's
trying
easy
to get
to
the
ignore
return
when
without
looking at
the
a historical
volatility.
chart,
But
but
does it
really
work?
hard to live through
Usually,
in real
no.
time.
They
A lot
often
of
end up
investors try to
paying
dodge
double
that price
because they
rate.
mistime things.
Like a car thief trying to
Studies
get the
show
car
tactical
without paying.
funds underperform.
They try market timing.
The average investor
Sell before the
underperforms
dip,
the very
buy back
funds they
before the
invest in
boom,
because they
trying to
jump
get the
in and out.
return without the
So maybe
volatility.
reframing
But
is
does it
key.
work?
Think
Usually,
of volatility
no.
not
They
as a
often end up
fine
paying
for
double
doing something
because they
wrong.
mistime things.
But as a fee,
Studies
you
show
pay for a
tactical funds
valuable service, the
underperform.
potential
The
for
average
long-term
investor
returns.
underperforms
paying
the
for a
very funds they
Disneyland
invest
ticket.
in because
You
they
pay
jump
the fee,
in and out.
You get the
So
potential
maybe
for a great
reframing is
ride.
key.
You have to
Think of
accept the fee
volatility
as part
not
of
as
the
a
deal.
fine
Exactly.
for
That
doing
mindset
something
shift
wrong.
helps you
But
stick
as a
around long enough
fee,
for
you pay
compounding
for a
to
valuable
actually
service,
work.
the
Okay,
potential
nearly
for
there.
long-term returns.
Let's
like
touch
paying
on
for
two
a
final
Disneyland
things.
ticket.
The seduction
You pay
of
the fee,
pessimism
you get the
and
potential
playing
for a
different
great
games.
ride.
Both really
You have to
important
accept the
for
fee as
navigating
part
the
of the deal.
financial world.
Exactly.
Historian
That mindset
Deirdre
shift helps you
McCloskey
stick
noted,
around long
"For
enough for
reasons I have
compounding
never
to actually
understood,
work.
Okay,
people like
nearly
to
there.
hear that the world is
Let's touch
going
on
to
two
hell."
final things.
Huh.
The seduction of
It's
pessimism
true, though, isn't
and
it?
playing different
Pessimism
games.
often
Both
sounds
really
smarter,
important for
more
navigating the
sophisticated
financial
than
world.
optimism.
Historian
Totally.
Deirdre
Remember that Wall
McCloskey
Street Journal
noted,
front page
for
story
reasons I
in
have
December
never
2008,
understood,
height of the
people like to
crisis.
hear that the world
It featured
is
a
going
Russian
to hell.
professor
Huh.
predicting the U.S.
It's
would
true,
break
though,
into
isn't
6
it?
pieces
Pessimism
by
often sounds
mid-2010.
smarter, more
Front
sophisticated.
page.
than
Seriously, that's
optimism.
extreme.
Totally.
Now
Remember
imagine
that
the
Wall
opposite.
Street Journal
Imagine
front page
someone
story
in Japan in
December
1946,
2008, height of the
totally
crisis.
devastated after
It
the war.
featured a Russian
Imagine them
professor
predicting that within a
the U.S.
generation
would break
their
into
economy
6
would
pieces
boom 15
by
fold.
mid-2010.
Life expectancy would
Front
nearly
page.
double.
Seriously, that's
They'd
extreme.
dominate
Now
electronics.
imagine the
They'd have
opposite.
been laughed
Imagine
out of the
someone in
room,
Japan in
dismissed as
1946,
utterly delusional,
totally
yet it
devastated after
happened.
the war.
So why is pessimism
Imagine
so
them
seductive?
predicting that within a
Couple of
generation
reasons,
their
probably.
economy would
Losses
boom
loom larger
15-fold.
psychologically
Life
than
expectancy
gains
would
as
nearly
evolutionary
double.
survival
They'd dominate
instinct.
electronics.
Might
Money
have been
affects
laughed
everyone,
out of
so
the
bad
room,
financial news
dismissed
gets
as
instant
utterly
attention.
delusional,
And
yet
progress
it
is
happened.
slow and
So why is
steady, while
pessimism so
setbacks are often
seductive?
fast and
Couple of
dramatic.
reasons,
Makes sense.
probably.
Bad news
Losses
travels
loom
fast.
And it
larger
grabs headlines.
psychologically than
Realistic
gains that's
optimism
evolutionary
often sounds
survival
kind of
instinct.
boring or naive.
Money
in
affects
comparison.
everyone, so
Okay,
bad
last
financial news
big
gets instant
concept.
attention. And
The
progress
danger
is
of playing
slow and
different
steady,
games.
while setbacks are often fast
Bubbles
and
often
dramatic.
form.
Makes sense.
House
Bad
largest.
news travels fast.
And it
When
grabs
investors
headlines. Realistic
innocently
optimism
take
often
cues from
sounds
other
kind of
investors
boring
who are
or naive
playing
in
a
comparison.
different game.
Okay,
Like in the
last
dot-com
big
bubble
concept.
or the housing bubble before
The
08.
danger
Exactly.
of playing different
Paying
games.
$700,000 for a
Bubbles
small
often
house
form
might
house
seem
largest.
insane
When
if you plan to live there
investors
for 30
innocently
years.
take
But if your
cues
game
from
is
other
flipping it in
investors who
3
are playing
months
a
for a
different
profit,
game.
Then
like
it
in the
makes perfect
dot-com
sense.
bubble
Your
or the
game
housing
is
bubble
short-term
before 08.
momentum trading.
Exactly.
The
Paying
long-term investor's game
$700,000
is
for a small
totally
house
different.
But they're
might
looking at the
seem
same price,
insane if you
reacting
plan
to
to
the
live there
same
for
market
30
moves.
But with
years.
completely
But if your
different
game is
goals
flipping
and
it
time
in 3
horizons,
months
that's where the
for a
trouble
profit,
starts.
Then
People
it
get
makes
swept up
perfect
playing
sense.
someone
Your
else's
game
game.
is
And this applies
short-term
beyond
momentum
bubbles, right?
trading.
Just
The
general
long-term
consumer
investor's
spending.
game
Absolutely.
is totally
So much
different.
spending
But
is
they're looking
socially
at the same
driven,
price,
trying to keep up with
reacting to
people
the
whose
same market
income,
moves.
goals,
But with
and financial
completely different
reality might be
goals and
totally
time
different from
horizons,
yours.
that's where
So
the
the key
trouble
takeaway
starts.
for
People
you,
get
the
swept
listener.
up playing
Define
someone
your
else's
game.
game.
And
What
this
are your
applies
goals,
beyond
your
bubbles,
time
right? Just
horizon?
general
And then
consumer
try your
spending.
best to
Absolutely.
stick to it
So
and
much
ignore
spending
the
is
noise
socially
from people
driven.
playing different
Trying to
games.
keep up with
That
people whose
clarity
income,
can be
goals, and
incredibly
financial
powerful.
reality
So
might be
let's bring
totally
it all
different
together.
from yours.
So the key takeaway
Actionable
for you,
lessons.
the listener.
Recognizing
Define
there's
your
no
game.
single
What are
right
your goals?
way. It's
your time
personal.
horizon. And
Like
then
a
try your
doctor
best
treating
to
a
stick
patient,
to
it
it and
depends on your
ignore the
situation.
noise from
Right.
people playing
We can't
different
tell you
games.
exactly what to
That
do
clarity
because we
can
don't know
be
you.
incredibly
But
powerful.
there are these
So
universal
let's bring it all together.
behavioral truths.
Actionable lessons.
recognizing there's
humility when
no
things go
single
right.
right way. It's
Forgiveness
personal.
when they go wrong.
Like a doctor
It's
treating
never
a
as good or
patient,
bad as
it depends on your
looks.
situation.
Less ego,
Right. We
more
can't tell
wealth.
you exactly what
Remember,
to do because
wealth
we don't
is
know
often
you.
what you don't
But there
see.
are these
It's the car not
universal
bought, the
behavioral
upgrade
truths.
skipped.
First,
People with real
find
lasting
humility when
wealth
things go
often
right.
just
Forgiveness
don't
when
care
they go
that much
wrong.
what others think
It's
about
never
their
as
stuff.
good or bad
Get
as
okay
it
with
looks.
things going
Less
wrong.
ego, more
Success
wealth.
often comes from
Remember,
just a few
wealth
key
is often
decisions
what you
working
don't
out
see.
really well.
It's the car
Peter
not
Lynch
bought,
was right
the
only
upgrade
6
skipped.
times out of 10.
People with
Use
real
money to gain
lasting
control
wealth
of your time.
often just
That's the highest dividend
don't
it
care
pays.
that much what others think
Independence,
about their stuff.
freedom.
Get
Be
okay with
nicer,
things going
less
wrong.
flashy.
Success
Humility and
often
kindness
comes from
earn
just
more
a few
respect than
key
expensive
decisions
things.
working out
And
really
just
well.
save.
Peter Lynch was
Save
right
money.
only 6 times
Even
out
without
of
a
10.
specific
Use
goal.
money to gain
It's that
control
crucial
over your
hedge
time.
against surprises.
That's the highest
Define the
dividend it
cost
pays.
of success.
Independence,
The
freedom.
volatility,
Be
be nicer,
the doubt,
less flashy.
and be ready to
Humility
pay
and
that fee.
kindness earn
Worship
more
room
respect
for
than
error.
expensive
It
things.
builds
And just
endurance.
save.
The key ingredient
Save
for
money.
compounding.
Even
Avoid
without
the
a specific
extreme
goal.
ends of
It's
financial
that crucial
plans.
hedge against
Your
surprises.
future self
Define the
will
cost
likely
of
want
success. The
Love,
volatility,
risk
the doubt,
enough to take
and be ready
calculated
to pay that
chances
fee.
because that's
Worship
where return
room
to
for
come from.
error. It
But
builds
be paranoid
endurance,
about ruinous
the key
risk,
ingredient for
the kind that
compounding.
takes you
Avoid
out
the
of the game
extreme ends of
permanently,
financial
like
plans.
too much leverage.
Your future self
Define your
will
game.
likely want balance.
Ignore others.
love,
respect them
risk
as smart
enough to
people
take
can
calculated
disagree
chances
because money is
that's where
personal.
return to come from.
Find what works for you.
But be
Well,
paranoid about
summarize.
ruinous
So,
risk, the
just to
kind
make
that
this
takes
concrete,
you out of the
I
game
can share a bit my own
permanently, like
philosophy,
too
how I
much
try to apply
leverage.
these ideas.
Define your game.
For me, the core goal has
Ignore
always
others.
been independence.
And respect
Inspired
them as
partly
smart
by
people
Charlie
can
Munger
disagree
wanting to
because
get
money is
independent,
personal.
and honestly,
Find
by
what
my
works for
dad.
you.
Well,
He's an ER
summarize.
doc, high
So,
stress job.
just to make
He
this
quit when he
concrete,
felt he
I
had
can
enough.
share a bit my
That
own
stuck with
philosophy,
me.
how
Having
I
that
try to
enough
apply
point
these
defined?
ideas.
Yeah.
For me,
So
the
my
core
wife
goal
and
has
I,
always
our
been
strategy has
independence.
basically been living
Inspired partly by
significantly
Charlie
below our
Munger
means.
wanting to get independent,
Trying to get the
and honestly,
goalposts
by
of
my
lifestyle
dad. He's
desires
an ER
to
doc,
stop
high-stress
moving
job.
early
He
on,
quit
which
when he
means
felt he had
pretty
enough.
much every
That
raise we've
stuck
ever
with
gotten
me.
has
Having
just
that
gone
enough
straight
point
into
defined?
savings
Yeah.
or independence.
So my wife and I, our
Deliberate
strategy has
lifestyle
basically been living
inflation control.
significantly below our
Exactly.
means.
And for us, that
Trying to get
means
the goalposts
specific
of
choices.
lifestyle desires
Like,
to stop
we own our
moving
house
early on, which
outright.
means
No
pretty much
mortgage.
every
Nope.
raise we've ever gotten
Now,
has just
on
gone straight
paper,
into savings.
maybe that's not the
or
most rational
independence
use of
fund.
capital.
Deliberate
We could
lifestyle
leverage it,
inflation
invest
control.
more.
Right, the
Exactly.
spreadsheets might
And
say
for us, that
otherwise.
means specific
feeling
choices.
of independence it
Like,
gives us.
we own our
Knowing
house
it's ours no matter
outright.
what.
No mortgage.
That
Nope.
feeling outweighs
Now,
any
on
potential
paper,
extra return.
maybe that's not the
That's
most
the
rational use of
reasonable,
capital.
over
We could
rational
leverage it,
idea in
invest
practice.
more.
Right, the
Totally.
spreadsheets
Sometimes
might say
you choose
otherwise.
happy
But
over right.
The feeling of
Yeah.
independence
We also
it
keep a
gives
pretty
us,
high cash position,
knowing it's
maybe
ours
20%
no matter
of
what.
assets. Way more
That
than advisors
feeling
usually
outweighs
suggest.
any
Why so much
potential
cash?
extra
I
return.
call it the oxygen
That's
of
the
independence. You never
reasonable,
want to be forced sellers of
over-rational
our stocks
idea in
because of some
practice.
unexpected expense
Sometimes
or
you
market
choose
crash.
happy over
It
right.
guarantees
Yeah.
we
We
can
also
let the
keep a pretty
investments
high
compound.
cash position,
Makes sense.
maybe
It's
20%
buying
of assets.
endurance.
Way more than
And for
advisors
investing
usually
itself.
suggest.
Why
I
so
used to
much
pick
cash?
stocks.
I call it
got
the
burned
oxygen
out.
of independence.
Now it's just
You never want to be
dollar-cost
forced
averaging into
sellers of our
low-cost,
stocks
broad
because of
market
some
index
unexpected
funds.
expense or
Simple,
market
boring,
crash.
effective for
It
many.
guarantees we can let the
I figure it
investments
gives the
compound.
highest odds of
Makes
long-term
sense. It's
success
buying
for most
endurance.
people.
And for
including me.
investing itself.
My
I used to
strategy
pick
doesn't
stocks,
rely on
got
genius
burned out.
stock picks
Now
or
it's just
timing
dollar
recessions.
cost averaging into
Relies on a high
low-cost broad
savings
market
rate,
index funds.
patience,
Simple, boring,
and just
effective
basic
for many.
optimism
Yeah.
about the global
I
economy
figure it gives the
creating value
highest odds
over
of
decades.
long-term success for
Focusing
most
on what you
people,
can
including
control,
me.
saving,
My strategy doesn't
patience,
rely on
behavior.
genius stock
Exactly.
picks or
I always
timing
say,
recessions.
I can afford to
relies
not
on
be
a
the
high
greatest
savings
investor
rate,
in the world, but
patience,
I can't afford to be a bad
and just
one.
basic
Simple
optimism
indexing
about the
helps
global
avoid being
economy
bad.
creating value
Doesn't need to
over
be more
decades.
complex than that.
Focusing
Sounds like a
on
very
what you
psychology
can
of money
control,
approach.
Trying.
saving, patience,
So as we wrap
behavior.
up this
Exactly.
deep dive,
I
the
always
main
say
takeaway
I can
really
afford
is
to not be the
doing well
greatest
with money
investor in
is
the
less
world,
about what's
but I
in
can't
your
afford to
head
be a bad one.
and more about
Simple
how you
indexing
behave.
helps
how you
avoid
handle
being bad.
luck and risk.
Doesn't
your
need to be more
patience,
complex
your ability
than
to
that.
sounds
Stick
like a
with a
very
plan.
psychology of money
Consider that
approach.
profound
Trying.
influence of human
So
behavior,
as we wrap up this
psychology,
deep dive, the main
on
takeaway
everything
really
financial.
is
Think about
doing
history,
well with
plagues,
money is less
wars,
about what's in
booms,
your head
busts.
and more
They're
about
all
how you
driven by
behave.
human
How you
psychology
handle
at
luck
scale.
and risk.
So the
your
final thought
patience,
maybe
your
for you
ability to
is,
stick with a plan.
What
Consider that
unexamined
profound
psychological
influence of
story
human
might you
behavior,
be telling yourself
psychology,
about your money?
on
Yeah.
everything
What's your
financial.
narrative? And if you
Think about history,
recognized it,
plagues,
could it
wars,
unlock
booms,
a
busts.
surprising new path
They're
for
all
you?
driven by
Something
human
to think about.
psychology at scale.
So the final thought maybe for you is, what unexamined psychological story might you be telling yourself about your money?
Yeah.
What's your narrative? And if you recognized it, could it unlock a surprising new path for you? Something to think about.